then we're going to take a look at a very important resource that I want to make you aware of, which comes from Appendix A, Reporting Research, which is the one experiment sample paper, which will be one of your most useful guides as we go through writing our research paper. All right. So the next thing I want to do is go through this sample paper, and we're just going to highlight some of the characteristics that we're going to be looking for in the final research paper. We're going to highlight some of the APA style that you'll be responsible for in the final paper. And this is more to make you aware of our end goal. Don't for a second think that you are responsible for this right off the get-go. So when we write our first method section, we're only going to have like 2 or 3 pieces of APA style that we're going to incorporate into the first method section. When we get to the results section, we're going to add a little bit about numbers. When we get to the discussion, we're going to add a little bit about citations. When we get to the introduction, we'll add a little bit more. So we're going to roll it out, but this is going to be a sort of like, this is the end of it kind of preview. But don't feel overwhelmed. So in the sample paper, style that you're going to be responsible for, I'm going to highlight it in green. Styles that you're not going to be responsible for, I'll have the little no circle there. And this is available in your textbook. And this is a highly valuable resource. It is probably the best visual aid that you can have in terms of what your paper is going to look like. So the first thing I want to point out is that when you write a paper, your paper is going to look different than when you read a published article. So when you read a published article, it's published in APA form, APA style, but different journals will have different publication styles. There's no title page in the journals that are published. So this is what's known as manuscript form, and then you have the other published form. We're going to learn manuscript form because unless you become an editor of a journal, you don't have to worry about publication form. So you'll notice that there's differences, but if you ever need a visual guide to what you're writing, don't go to a published paper because it's not necessarily going to be correct. Go to this one experiment sample paper because this is your best guide in terms of how things should look. So, for example, this is your title page right here. Notice that it has what's called a running head. So it says here the running head is a shortened version of the title up to 50 characters, including spaces. The title page shows the words running head followed by a shortened version of the title in caps. So you can read that description and it tells you exactly what you need to do. But then you can also, with this resource, just take a look at it and say, oh, okay, so that's what a running head looks like. Running head here, getting a bigger slice, all in capitals. Okay, I get it, I know what it looks like. So when you're putting your paper together, take a look at this resource and make sure that your paper looks like this paper. And it's a great visual guide to use. So we're going to have running heads. We're going to have page numbers. So you might be asking yourself, do I number the first page number 1, or is it the second page is number 1? Does the title page count? Yep, title page counts. It's right up there. Title page is number 1, and it's in your upper right-hand corner. The title is usually no more than 12 words, so we're going to place a limit on how long the title can be. Title and author and affiliations are centered and appear in the upper half of the page. So this is a phrase that I think catches a lot of students. Centered in the upper half of the page. What does centered in the upper half of the page mean? Does that mean that is it here that it's supposed to be? Is it all the way up here that it's supposed to be? Centered in the upper half of the page means that you cut your page in half, and then you cut it in half again, and then you put your title in the center of the upper half, right? Centered in the upper half of the page, that's what that means. Or you can just look at this and say, oh, okay, I get it, kind of like 3/4 of the way up. Let's make my title page look like this title page here. What we're not going to do, author's notes. Author's notes are usually when you submit this to a journal, they need to know who to contact, they need to know basically his contact information, who's the corresponding author, who do they go to when they have issues. We're not going to do that, so you don't have to worry about the author's note. Basically, your title page is going to look like this. The last thing I'll mention is that your title page is going to have your name. You're going to be the first author because you are doing the majority of the work on this project. I will be second author, so make sure that you include me because I did a large portion of this work, including the statistics. And one thing that I'll point out here, and this is one thing I really like about APA, you'll notice that none of these names here have any titles with them. So maybe they're people with their PhDs. Maybe they're undergrad students. Maybe they're a high school student that hasn't graduated even high school yet. Maybe they have a master's. Maybe they have an education degree. APA doesn't care. They're researchers, and they're listed in the order with which they contributed to the research. And I kind of like that. I like the fact that as long as you're making a contribution, that's how you're measured. It's not Dr. Janet Polivy and the rest. It's Janet Polivy and Peter and Raj Beer, and they're all on the same page. So I like that. So as proud as I am of my PhD, I do not want to see Dr. Yurevich in the title there, but that's your title page. All right, page number 2, your abstract. Again, different than the published form. You'll notice that when you see a published article, number 1, the title is at the top of the page. Right below it is the abstract, and below that is where the introduction starts. In your manuscript form, the abstract gets its own page. I don't know why. I guess it made it easier for editors to read it back in the day, but that is the rule. Abstract gets its own page. Notice that the running head is still at the top, but no longer has the word running head. So again, nice little visual cue for that. Notice it's numbered at page number 2. The biggest thing with the abstract, and don't ask me why, this is again just one of those things about APA, is that that paragraph is not indented. That is one of the first things any editor or reviewer is ever going to see. They're going to see your abstract. And if they see an indent in that abstract, that's just a signal to them that you don't know APA style. So it might seem like a small thing. It is a small thing. Honestly, I don't think it's going to throw anybody off if you indent your abstract, but it's a signal that you don't know APA. So make sure that you don't indent your abstract. I'll give you an example of this from the world of entertainment. So you might have heard this about Van Halen, the rock and roll band, that they wanted their dressing room to be set up in a certain way. And one of the things they did not want was brown M&Ms. They would not allow brown M&Ms. And if they walked into their dressing room and they saw brown M&Ms, that was it. You know, they would throw a fit. It would be crazy. Does anybody know why? Wes?
It's because they had a lot of complicated lighting equipment and stage stuff, and it was at near the back of the rider, so that made sure if they read all of it, they wouldn't have brown M&Ms, and they'd be sure that everything was set.
Exactly. They had a lot of complicated lighting equipment, stuff that could go wrong, stuff that might be dangerous. And they had it all spelled out, what they needed to do, the people that were setting up the arena. And in that agreement was also, we don't want any brown M&Ms. So rather than having to check 1,000 different lights and 1,000 different riggings, they could just walk into their dressing room. And if they saw no brown M&Ms, they were saying, these guys know what they're doing. They took care of everything. If they saw brown M&Ms, they were like, this is horrible. Who knows what's going to go wrong? That's your brown M&M right there. It's going to be one of the first things that I see. If I see an indentation, that's like seeing brown M&Ms in the bowl. I know this is probably not going to be good APA style. And the same thing with professional reviewers. If they see that indentation, it's like that signal. So don't indent. Make sure that you don't have that indentation. Abstract begins on a new page with the word abstract centered. And your abstract, there's generally a word length to your abstract. I'm going to show you how to write an abstract so you can always be within that word length and you get a full synopsis of the article. And basically the key is you get 1 to 2 sentences per section. So your abstract is going to be 4 sentences to 8 sentences long. We'll go over all these details when we're writing the abstract, but that's an easy way to not have to count the numbers, and still be able to summarize the entire abstract. Sorry, the entire paper. All right, this is your introduction. Notice introduction is not labeled introduction. Introduction is labeled with the title there. So again, just a nice little visual representation of what your introduction should look like. Still got the running head, still got the page numbers. And then what we're going to be taking a look at here, or things that we're going to be focusing on, citations, right? So these two here are citations, that's a citation, that's citation, that's citation. All 5 of these are about citations. Citations are going to be a big part when we write the introduction. We don't need them for the method section too much. We need 1 for the method section. We don't need them at all for the results section. But when you get into the discussion, you're going to cite a lot. And when you get into the introduction, you're going to cite heavily. Because the introduction is all about what other people did, what other theories people came up with, what other ideas people came up with, what other work people came up with. And the purpose of a citation is to show, give credit, that those were the people that came up with that idea. So for example here, they go, whereas unrestrained eaters, talking about self-regulating eating, whereas unrestrained eaters typically compensate by eating less after a larger preload than after a smaller one, restrained eaters often counter-regulate, eating more after a large preload than after a small preload or after no preload at all. This is not the author's idea. That's not their finding, that's not their work. Whose work is it? Well, it's Adams and Leary, it's Herman, Polivy, and Esses, it's Polivy, Heatherton, and Herman, Polivy, Herman, Hackett, and Kulschnick. It's their work. So we need to cite to show where we got our ideas from. And it's twofold. Number 1, we're giving credit. Number 2, if I read this sentence and I said, I don't believe it, I don't think that's true, well, the authors are basically saying, all right, go check with Adams and Leary if you need more information. Go look at Herman, Polivy, and Esses for their 1987 paper. They're letting you know where you can get more information if you want to check up on what they wrote. So there's a ton of citation rules. So you'll notice here in this multiple citation, it's alphabetical by first author. First author, second author, third author, those orders never change. You do not touch author order. It's like sacred. Whoever did the most work, first author. Whoever did the second most, second author, and so on down the line. You got to respect that. You don't get to move those around. But Adams comes before Herman. Herman comes before Polivy. Polivy and Heatherton comes before Polly and Herman. Right? So it's alphabetical according to author when you have multiple. It's you use the ampersand for multiple authors. Right? You don't use the word and. You use a semicolon to split the different publications. There's a lot of rules. You'll have them all listed out, but just be aware of them when we start getting into citations. You want to identify how many authors does it have in terms of how do you cite it. Is it in parentheses or is it in not parentheses? Those are the 2 big things. But we'll introduce that later. But again, if you're wondering, should I use et al, should I not use? Is et al with a period and then a comma, or is it just with a comma? Again, nice little visual aid. In terms of punctuation, we're not going to be focusing on that. So I assume that you have, the English skills. English 131 is prerequisite, but we won't be like stringent in checking up on certain aspects of punctuation. All right, so once again, citations going to be a big part of this. One of the first things we're going to do is headers. So when we write the method section, we got three subsections in that method section. One of the first things we're going to do is headers. So your major sections, they're your first level sections. They are centered and bolded. The next subsection, that is paragraph form, boldface, and flush to the left. And again, if you don't know what that means, right? Sometimes paragraph form, you might say, well, what's paragraph form? Again, shows you what it should look like. Use this resource. Numbers, there's a bunch of rules about numbers. The key thing that you want to know about numbers is that sometimes in APA form, they're written out as the numeral. Sometimes they're written out as the word. Here, 106 is written out as the numeral. In other situations, it will be written out, ONEHUNDREDSIX, right? It will be written out 106. So we'll go over those when we get into, we'll introduce those when we get into the, I believe, results section. But just be aware, whenever you're writing a number, check to make sure, do I write this as a numeral? Do I write this as a number? So one of the basic rules is that if it's 10 or above, you write it as a number. If it's below 10, you write it as a word. But there are other rules that counter that. So we'll see what those are when we get to that section. And you will see that there are a lot of numeral rules. So just be aware of that. When you write a number, ask yourself, should it be the number? Should it be the word? And that'll keep you in APA style. All right, notice here we have materials. That's a second level heading. Food here is a third level heading. So a third level heading would have indented, bold, paragraph form with a period at the end. Once again, if you're not sure what that means, right? Do I capitalize all the words, or do I not capitalize all the words? Well, you don't, and you end it with a period. Do I hit return and then begin the paragraph underneath? No, you don't. You got it right here. So again, nice little visual aid for that. Define unfamiliar acronyms when they're first used, and then you spell them all out. We might use acronyms, we might not. Some of these APA criteria are going to be things that everybody is going to use. So everybody's going to use citations, everybody's going to write numbers, everybody's going to have headings. Other ones might come up if, depending upon what your content is. So we're not necessarily going to use acronyms, but if you do, make sure that when you use that acronym for the first time, spell it all out, give the citation and where it's from. That's the way that you use an acronym. The levels of subheadings here is telling you about bold and its paragraph form at the end of the period. One that we will use that I'll mention this when we're writing the method section, but your anchors of a scale are in italics. So when we say that we measured confidence on a scale, we give them the anchors. We say we measured confidence on a scale from 1, not at all confident, to 4, completely confident. Those phrases, not at all and completely, those are in italics. And this is a nice little feature because if I was trying to find what the anchors of a scale are, it would be very easy for me just to scan this and go, oh, boom, italics right there. Very slightly or not at all, up the way to 5 for extremely. It helps you navigate. So much of what we're doing with APA style, such as the headings, helps you navigate, helps you know if you're in a subsection of a subsection. The more you know about APA style, the easier it is to go through a paper and kind of know where you are. All right, so once again, second level section. So we were in the materials subsection. That section had a food subsection, questionnaire subsection, restraint scale subsection. Then we pop back out, and now we're in the procedure section. And again, you can see numbers less than 10. We have one larger slice rather than the number one largest slice. All right, and as I mentioned, there's a ton of rules with numbers. So the general rule, above 10, 10 or above, you write it as a number. 9 or below, you write it as a word. But if it comes with a unit of measurement, you write it as a number. So when we're talking about recall periods, and we're saying they had 2 minutes to recall, and the words were up on the screen for 2 seconds at a time, those 2s, they're written out as numbers, not as the words. And again, you will see in your resources, there's just going to be a list of write it out as a numeral when, bum, 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 write it out as a number when, dun, 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 dun. And all you need to do is when you're writing it, say, I'm writing a number, what do I do? And then you check it, you reference it. All right, so we got the results section right here. Again, it's your next big section, center, boldface. When we're writing results, we will go over how to write the stats here. So for example, statistical terms are presented in italics. That just makes them easier to identify. There's rules for when you have a 0 point something something or just point something something. We'll go over that. And again, statistical symbols such as the mean, such as the F statistic, those are presented in italics, such as the p-value here. So when you're doing, this is a nice visual example, when you're doing your library assignment, when you're reading through, don't even read through. When you're scanning through, scan for it. And you should be able to scan down the center, find results. Look at your results. Well, there's a weird piece of statistical jargon. There's a p-value, there's M. Even if you don't know what those are, you know their stats. This is a primary research article, almost for sure. Actually, I've read it, it is for sure. All right. What else? Greek letters. Once again, don't worry about the kind of Greek letters here and stuff. In terms of what we're going to be writing, we're not going to need them. But again, there's partial eta squared. You might not know what a partial eta squared is, but you know it's stats. So we got that for our primary research article. We're going to have figures. So we are going to produce graphs of the results from our experiment. When you point to a table or you point to a figure, when you mention it, number one, it has to be mentioned in the order that they occur in the text. So the first time you go see figure this, it has to be see figure 1. The next one is see figure 2. You can't start off with see figure 2, right? It has to be ordered, it has to be numbered in the order that they occur. All right, and then again, we have our last major section, the discussion section. Quotation marks, you're not going to need to know about quotation marks, and I'll mention why in just a moment. And APA strongly encourages writers to use past tense for reporting procedures and results. There's a couple of rules about tenses that we'll mention, but in general, it's just kind of the same principles of good writing that you've been using, up until now as well, in terms of the actual prose, the actual writing of it. All right, the last big section that you're going to be working on is your references. And the references are where you mention everything that you've cited. So unlike a bibliography, where you might just report materials and resources that you used that were helpful, that you read but maybe didn't directly reference in your paper, in a scientific journal article, your references have to be cited. If you didn't cite it, it doesn't go into the references. If it's in the references, it has to be cited. If you cited it, it has to be in the references. So each one of these names appeared somewhere in the body of the text, right? So Knight and Boland, 1989. If Knight and Boland is mentioned here, they better have, there it is, Knight and Boland here in the references. So it's got to have that one-to-one correspondence. And there are a ton of rules about references. That one you don't need. But there's a tons of rules about references. Basically, it has to do with the authors and the date being presented. It has to do with the title being in paragraph form. Notice no capitalizations, ends in a period. The journal is capitalized and in italics. And then you have the issue and you got the page numbers. That's the basic breakdown. But there's a lot of rules in terms of how many authors, what's the order that they're presented in, all that kind of stuff. But we'll get to that. That'll be one of the last things you put together. So whether you use a book or whether you get your data from your information from a book, whether you get it from an article, there's a reference style for each different type of information. So you will definitely have references for the articles that you find, that everybody will have. But if you find a book, like if you're looking through your textbook and you're like, oh my gosh, that's a great example, I'm going to use that in my introduction. You're going to cite that textbook, you need to reference it. Books are referenced different than journal articles. All right, so there's a bunch of rules there, and then there's rules for tables. So if you want to present your data in the form of a table, so if you want to present the high levels of false memory confidence, for pairs and triples versus for individuals in a table, feel free. There are rules for how a table is set up, and APA has a nice little checklist. APA hates, they do not have vertical divisors. So that default Word table that you can insert with its vertical lines, not APA style at all, no vertical lines in this one. And first words of headings, we won't worry about that. And your table note, you don't have to worry about that. For the table, all you need is the title of your table and the fact that it's table 1 and then the actual table itself. These notes are, extra stuff that we won't have to do. If, on the other hand, you choose to do figures, I like figures better. I usually don't use tables. You need to have the figure. It has to be figure number 1. You do need a caption. So there's rules on figure captions and how to number your figures throughout that process. All right, and again, that is one of your best resources. And anything in addition to what I mentioned here today, I will add them as we go through our section. So I will literally say, all right, we're getting ready to write the method section. Here's what goes into a method section. Here's the different parts of the method section you need. And here's a list of the APA stuff that we're going to be introducing for this method section. So don't at all think that for the first thing you write, you're going to have to do everything and you're going to have to check everything. That's going to be for the final paper. We're going to, again, add it in piece by piece. All right, are there any questions on, it's pretty straightforward, but are there any questions about anything we've gone over so far? All right, some final stipulations. So, first stipulation, no footnotes. So, footnotes are allowed in APA, and you might actually find an article that has footnotes in APA. We're not going to allow it for your assignment in this course, and the reason for that is there just really isn't a need. Footnotes are typically some anecdotal information, maybe a personal communication that you had at a conference, maybe some technical information that a typical reader wouldn't need, but if you're really interested, you can access the footnote. Let's make it easier for ourselves. We don't need footnotes, so there won't be any footnotes in your paper. The big one, I am not allowing quotes for your research paper. Absolutely no quotes whatsoever. And much like footnotes, quotes are allowed in APA style. You'll see entire sections on how to quote properly in APA style. The reason I don't allow quotes is because even though they're allowed in APA style, they're not allowed for the assignment because in the past, not everybody, but some students have just vastly overused and abused their use of quotes. So part of this course is learning how to write scientifically. Part of this course is figuring out how to paraphrase, how to present information in a clear manner, how to organize different sections of information. And to be honest, most students do that. This is just to protect me against those few students that sometimes say things like, or write a paper and it'll look like, Smith and Smith's theory of false memories states, and then they have like a block quote, an entire paragraph quote. And then at the end of that quote, it says, in response to this, Melvin and Johnson wrote, and then they have another block quote. So I end up with 98% quoted material, 2% of their own writing, and that's not learning how to write, that's not growing in your abilities. So it's hard to say, well, you can have 8% of your text quote, it's just too hard. So for this, no quotes. It might be tempting to use a quote. I know that oftentimes in essay writings and things, that wonderful quote is just, one of the greatest things is to find that wonderful quote that works. Don't do it. If you're tempted to write a quote, rip the quotation key off your keyboard because it will be heavily penalized. All right, I need to do it just to maintain the integrity of the writing aspect of this course. Quotes will be heavily penalized. Please do not fall into that trap. Don't quote, and that will be, and you'll do amazing. Any final questions on anything that we've gone over today? It's all good? All right. So that's it for what I wanted to cover today.